Have you ever tried to fix yourself? Like really tried? White-knuckled it, swore this time would be different, only to watch yourself snap right back to the same patterns and choices. There's a character in this book who finds himself in exactly that situation. Eustace gets turned into a dragon, and when he finally wants out, he claws at the scales himself, peels off a layer, then another, and every time the dragon's still there underneath. He can't cut deep enough to reach the thing that's actually wrong with him. In the end, he just has to stop, lie down, and let Aslan do it. Today, we're talking about The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, part 5 in our series through the Chronicles of Narnia, and that image sits at the heart of this book, and it asks the question, is real change something you do or something done to you? This is The Christian Skeptic. Let's get to it. All right, man. Well, back for another episode of The Christian Skeptic, the Narnia series, Voyage of the Dawn Treader. This one's going to be interesting because Voyage of the Dawn Treader is kind of was like a middle of the road book for me as a kid. Like, didn't love it, didn't hate it. It wasn't, well, I didn't hate any of them, but it was just kind of, like I said, middle of the road. So I know you said it has come up in your estimation after a reread.
I mean, after this was the most enjoyable time I ever. This is probably like the 5th or 6th time I've read Voyage of the Dawn Treader, at least, and in recent memory, like the 3rd time in the last decade or so. And I actually enjoyed it a lot more. I think I saw a lot more in it. Like this and Prince Caspian always just kind of seemed like a battle and an adventure. Like that's how I was.
Yeah.
Prince Caspian was all just like building up to this battle, and they had this battle. And I enjoyed Prince Caspian more this time than previously as well, but maybe that's because I was teaching through it, and so I was gaining more insight than I normally would. But I would say still Prince Caspian kind of lands at the bottom of the list for me, whereas Voyage of the Dawn Treader now makes its way up into the middle of the books, which honestly the only middle books for me would be Magician's Nephew and Voyage of the Dawn Treader. The other 4 are absolutely fantastic and phenomenal in my mind. And so this is still very good though. It's a very good book. It is, as we've kind of recapped each one for those who haven't read it in a while or want to know the story because they want to see theology displayed, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it is what it says. It's one of the only books that doesn't take place in Narnia, really at all. It's Lucy and Edmund sucked through a picture as a portal back into the land of Narnia, but they're already on the Eastern Sea, and they're sucked through with their nasty cousin Eustace Scrubb, who C.S. Lewis says was so bad he almost deserved his name. And so there's a ton in the book of Lewis taste. It's the most Irish of the books. It draws on a lot of Irish folklore throughout the book, a lot of legend and fairy tale. It shows Lewis's disdain for the modern education system, which we might have discussed on a previous podcast, and it certainly is seen in The Silver Chair, which we'll be discussing next, where he just hated everything about how Eustace referred to his parents by their legal Christian names instead of his mom and dad, and how modernity was corrupting so much of, at least in his day, and the same would be true in our day, with the escalation of technology is corrupting so much of imagination in children and wonder in children and respect in children and honor. And so it draws on a lot of those themes throughout the book. And there's, the book is set so that Prince Caspian is now King Caspian, and they're searching for 7 lost lords who knew Caspian's father. And as they're, the 7 lords themselves is kind of an interesting case study. I've heard different theories around them. I think each of the lords represent vice and virtue, like the 7 vices and virtues, corresponding virtues to the 7 deadly vices. But you have those 7 lords they're kind of looking for, and they discover them, or at least find remnants of them, or hints of them across these different islands they stop at. And at each island, there's a various temptation, which I'm sure we'll get into. It's very interesting how Lewis captures it. It's the only Narnian book that does not have a true villain in the book. There's not one singular villain like the White Witch or the Green Witch or the evil King Miraz from Caspian or whatever. It's the only book that does not have like a real villain. And but
it's
rather
almost like the villains themselves are the villains are like the people themselves. Like there's a lot in this book about how like the evil comes from within, not without, you know?
Yeah. And I think it's very like insightful to point out, and I'm not the first one who's pointed this out, but in studying it scholastically, meaning like listening to lectures from different universities, and several people point this out, but something that I saw as well is it's the only book. I mean, Edmund is a real disaster in the first book. He's a complete traitor, but it's the only book where you get a glimpse into the soul of a really dastardly person, a really terrible person, by their own tongue. Because when Scrub becomes the dragon, he kind of writes it down, like his experiences as a dragon and what he's feeling. And then later on, when he's back to being a boy again, Eustace, he recounts it of his own words to Edmund. And so what Lewis is doing is he's letting us peer into the soul of like a pretty reprobate, self-centered, nasty, spoiled little child. And so there's a lot of insight. Like you said, the villain of the story, more than anything else, is themselves. It's Edmund becoming greedy. It's Lucy becoming envious of her sister's beauty, like later in the book. It's them becoming fearful as they sail through, these shadowlands or whatever. And then obviously one of the big themes is like they're pressing onward toward Aslan's land, which is the presence of God. And so there's a lot in the book, but it really is a journey or a voyage. It kind of depicts the Christian pilgrimage that each one of us is on, and the kind of dangers and temptations and fears that we'll face as we go along. So that's a overarching synopsis of the book, and I definitely think it's a very worthy read. Like I really do.
Yeah.
It's grown on me a lot, and I think it's there's a couple moments alone, like Eustace transformation being one of them, Lucy and Edmund being with Aslan in the book. There's a couple of moments alone. I even think when they're sailing through, I think it's chapter 12, where they're sailing through the darkness, and there's so much fear, and it's almost like all of their worst fears are being realized. There's certain moments alone that are worth the read of the book. But I think the whole narrative of it is really intriguing and well done.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to start with the Eustace and the whole undragoning, if you will. I mean, it's a very famous scene, and it gets at the themes of transformation and salvation and all that. But so that particular scene, Eustace has been turned into a dragon, and he's trying to, like I said, undragon himself. And it's one of the clearest pictures of grace, I think, in the whole series. Eustace makes multiple attempts to kind of claw the dragon scales from himself, to change himself, and he can't do it, and finally gives up, and Aslan does it for him. So we get this really clear picture of grace and how salvation and transformation are done to us. But why is it important, you think, that the self-clawing fail first?
Well, I think there's a lot to it. I mean, first of all, I think it might be a little bit of a mistake to say that he's turned into a dragon. I think more accurately what Lewis is saying is that he's becoming on the outside what he's always been on the inside. And so while yes, it's accurate to say he's turning into a dragon physically, Lewis is there saying, you've been a boy on the outside, but you've been a dragon on the inside, and now Aslan is going to take the dragon on the inside and transform you to a boy, a living boy on the inside. And so it's really interesting what Lewis does is the dragon aspect, which is evil in a sense in mythology, is almost as soon as Eustace becomes a dragon on the outside, he actually becomes a living boy on the inside. Like the transformation, or you could say regeneration, if you want to use that terminology, new life begins to kind of ebb and flow into him, and he's sorrowful almost right away. And Lewis does a good job of depicting something that's overlooked a lot of times is he has a golden bracelet on his arm that he's put on his arm when Eustace first. So Eustace is, it can't be overstated that Eustace is not a bad kid in the world's estimation. He's just kind of bratty. He's just kind of selfish, which I love because I love in the sense of Lewis spares no punches. He doesn't even when Eustace is like writing his journal, he's just picking at Reepicheep the mouse, and he's disobeying orders, and he's lazy, and he gets himself in this pickle on this island because he doesn't want to work like the rest of them. So he goes running off, and he finds this cave of treasure, and he sees this old dragon crawl out and die, who happens to be one of the 7 lost lords. And this is one of the vices that you see with greed in the book. You also see it earlier on with a pool that turns everything to gold, and one of the lords threw off his clothing and jumped into the pool and was turned to gold. But for Eustace, maybe that's later on actually, but for Eustace anyway, he's such a brat the whole time. He's just such a horrific person on the inside, even though on the outside he's like, we would be like, oh, he's a bratty child, but like we wouldn't. And he's only, I think, 9 years old in the book, so he's pretty young, and so all that kind of builds up to this moment where here he's being lazy. He runs this place. He becomes greedy. He puts on this ring. When he becomes a dragon, the ring is stuck on his arm, and it's painful all the time. Which I think Lewis is once again portraying for us, like how painful the repercussions of greed are. Like when someone becomes truly greedy and envious, covetous, like it never turns out well. Like it leaves them kind of alone, isolation, and hurting and wounded. And so that's where you find Eustace, and he kind of goes and makes himself known eventually to Caspian and Lucy and Edmund and Drinian and others. And they fly around, and he like actually helps them work now. So he's becoming a boy on the inside while he's a dragon on the outside. But then the realization comes, we can't take him on the ship with us. The Dawn Treader is a very small ship. Like we cannot take a dragon on board. He can't fly along beside. He's going to get tired. We're going to have to leave him behind. And Eustace is like, and that shows the transformation as well, that he's gone from like wanting off the ship, I don't want anything to do with these people, to now I'm like sorrowful that I'm not going to be in my community, like with my people when I need them. Yeah. And so that's when you have this moment of achievement versus grace that you're talking about, where Eustace tries his darndest. He tries his hardest to peel away, to undress himself, but to peel away. I mean, because Aslan says, undress yourself. And he's like, I don't have any clothes on. And then he's like, he thinks to himself as he's telling Edmund later on, he's like, well, I mean, a dragon, snakes shed, a dragon could shed. And so he starts picking away at his scales or whatever. And it doesn't hurt. It's not painful. Yeah. It's not really uncomfortable. And he does this 3 times. And all of his, and from all accounts of the story, 3 very legitimate on his part attempts. And that's why so many good, solid biblical theologians have pointed out that this is such a picture of grace, like sovereign grace, really. Yeah. Even though Lewis was not Calvinistic necessarily, I think in some ways he was more Calvinistic than he realized, because Eustace doesn't deserve it. He just deserves to be a dragon forever. He can't do it himself. And he doesn't even know what to do. And Aslan tells him what to do. And what Aslan tells him to do, he's not even capable of doing. Like, undress yourself. He can't do that. And so then Aslan says, of course, I'm going to have to undress you. And Eustace says the first cut hurt like the worst thing imaginable. Yeah. But the stuff starts actually peeling off. And transformation takes place, and he goes from being a dragon on the inside and a boy on the outside to a dragon on the outside and a dragon on the inside to a boy on the inside and a dragon on the outside to a boy now on the outside and a boy on the inside. Like, I mean, there's a complete transformation that takes place where it shows, it almost shows creation, fall, redemption, new creation, like that. Yeah. The meta narrative. And so I don't mean to like exacerbate that point, but he goes through the whole transformation process to he's finally now a boy on the inside, a living boy, and a boy on the outside as well. And another thing that's really interesting, I love that like Lewis points out that Eustace still had his bad days. He was still whiny, he was still bratty, he was still selfish, but it was at that moment that he started to actually become better, like to become by grace more of what he should be. Yeah.
Well, like you said, Lewis wasn't a Calvinist. So what was the point of Aslan doing this sort of, hey, undress yourself? Aslan knew he wouldn't be able to do it. Is Lewis just trying to show us that, hey, regeneration is not something we can accomplish within ourselves?
I think that he was in step with his mere Christian mindset. He was trying to press forward, because even a more Arminian or Molinistic thinker would say that it's all of grace. So I think he was trying to press forward without diving too much in the weeds of how, and at least in this depiction of Eustace transforming back from a dragon into a boy, it is very Calvinistic. I mean, and I don't think he intended that nor did he intend to paint a more Arminian approach to this at all. But it's just, I think he was really trying to portray this is grace. Like what the word of Aslan to undress yourself is the law. The law is coming and saying, do this stuff. And you're like, oh, all the word of Aslan said to him, which is the law of God, is, I can't do it. I've tried. I cannot do it. And then grace comes, Aslan steps in and actually does for him, much like Aslan does in a different sense on the stone table and Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, does for Edmund what Edmund couldn't do for himself, or wouldn't have satisfied justice per se. So it's really just a stunning script to read, where Edmund's
it's a great scene. Yeah.
Eustace's testimony, his description of becoming a living boy again. It's just really, really good. And Lewis captured it super well.
Yeah, and you already mentioned the painful part, and that was a follow-up that I wanted to ask you, is why do you think that Lewis is depicting grace and regeneration here as painful? And you pointed out before that when, Eustace was trying to self-help himself out of the dragon skin, that it didn't really hurt much. And then Aslan comes in and Lewis makes a point of describing like this was very painful experience.
Well, I don't want people to get twisted. I don't think that sanctification or transformation, like becoming alive, which would be regeneration technically, but then the process whereby we're becoming slowly more like a living soul is sanctification, where we're becoming more like Christ. And that does not necessarily entail physical pain. Like the world around us is a world of anguish and suffering. We talk about this all the time because it's true. And so there's going to be pain for believers and unbelievers, and there's going to be happiness and joy and peace for believers and unbelievers. More of a surface level peace is what I'm talking about there, not the deep seated peace. But I think what Lewis is getting at more, and what Scripture would get at, is that the undressing of the soul, like the casting off of that which has previously satisfied our souls, is going to be spiritually painful. Like releasing that which has satisfied us. Because as I've said many times, if you're sitting and you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. Like you're just you're not doing it right. Like sin is fun, but momentarily so. Being self-absorbed is fun, but very momentarily so. And so it's a painful process to be stripped then of what you've relied upon, what you've depended upon, what has been your identity. And so it's more of a spiritual, even psychological, emotional wreckage that begins to take place at times when transformation takes shape. Then sometimes that can be physical, but it doesn't always have to be.
Yeah. Another point that I had is, moving on from that scene, is the whole thing with Reepicheep in this story. I feel like Lewis really uses the character of Reepicheep, the mouse, to kind of exemplify his whole argument from desire that he talks about, meaning that if we find within ourselves a longing for something that doesn't exist in this world, it logically implies that there is something out there beyond this world that would satisfy that. And so what do you think about that? And does an unsatisfied longing necessarily point to a real object that satisfies it?
I think that's intellectually consistent and a rather sophisticated argument. I think the last battle kind of draws to completion. And I talked about it this past Sunday. We finished up the last battle just yesterday. But Lewis was a follower of Plato. He was a big fan of Plato. And that Plato's philosophy, at least in part, was that this world is all shadow. And there's a greater substance basically somewhere else. And Lewis believed that. But whereas Plato couldn't tell you where that substance was, Lewis believed it was the new heavens and new earth that was to come. And so, and you see that in which we'll get to here in a couple of weeks, but the last battle where the kids are like, hey, isn't that the old home that had the wardrobe in it where you, Lord Diggory, lived? And he's like, oh, that is. And they're like, but I thought it was destroyed. And it's like, nothing's really destroyed because everything is like recreated in its beauty. And so I think when it comes to Reepicheep and his longing, that there is a longing to actually see and experience substance, which is when we are embodying and truly embracing the themes of Scripture, which we struggle to do. and thank God for his grace, but like we struggle to do. But when we do that, I think there is more of an awareness of that we are in the Shadowlands, that this is the cover page of the book, and that there is true substance from which these shadows spring that's coming. And that gives a lot of hope and comfort and motivation. And so that's how I would look at it. As I think Lewis captures it pretty well, in that all that is beautiful about Narnia and all that's great about the voyage and the islands and the people they meet and the companionship is but a shadow of like a greater companionship and a greater beauty and a greater unfolding.
Yeah.
And so there should be, we have to be careful, because like we don't want to believe or spouse or preach escapism. Even after Sunday, this past Sunday, I had a girl come to me and say, well, is it really that bad to like not want to be here anymore? You know, if it's this great, which you're glad that Lewis and Scripture could be communicated in such a way that it would be something to look forward to in anticipation, especially in the face of like so much trouble here in this life. But yet at the same time, like we were put here for a reason, for a purpose. And I think Reepicheep symbolically accomplishes that mission by showing honor and courage and faith and loyalty on his way, clearly with a single-minded focus of Aslan's country.
Well, and just the whole concept of longing in general, even at the end, Lewis frames the world's end as the fulfillment of desire, or at least for Reepicheep, rather than a lens of judgment, which, you know, a lot of American evangelicalism has focused on, you know, come to Jesus so you can escape hell, or use a lot of fear type of things to draw people in. And Lewis just doesn't do that at all. Like everything is about this longing and the fulfilled desire and the higher up and deeper in and further on. And I do love that about him and this book in particular.
Yeah, and I think that statement, just going back to that statement really quick, of a very famous statement, I think it's from Mere Christianity, where he says, if I find within myself a desire that nothing is worth and satisfy the most reasonable explanations I was made for a greater world. That's what I was saying. I think there is a sophistication, intellectual consistency there that is true if you're theistic. Like, obviously, if you're atheistic, you don't really have an argument. That's why I don't understand, like, angry atheistic thinkers is like, what are you even arguing for? Like, I mean, like, there's nothing to position yourself from. But if you're theistic and you believe in the existence of God, then it would make sense that there's a desire that has been in some way formed or fashioned by God within us that we cannot find satisfaction for here. Then the most reasonable explanation would be that there is satisfaction to be found in something else or somewhere else or someone else. And so I think that's very consistent, and I think he does do a good job of kind of capturing that really with the whole Narnia series, because there's so many moments from book 1 to book 7 where people are trying to be satisfied with fame or riches or whatever it is that we all chase, success, a victory, and they never can find that unless they're doing it through the strength of Aslan and ultimately for Aslan. They can't find that satisfaction.
Yeah. The last question or note I really had about this one is Aslan's whole "by another name" line, that scene of the book. So maybe we can wrap up this episode discussing that, but there's a scene in this book where Aslan tells the children the whole reason they were brought to Narnia was so they could know him under a different name back home. And as Christians, we read that really plainly as Lewis saying Aslan is a representation of Jesus. And I think that, to me, seems like the most obvious interpretation of what Lewis is saying. However, where it connects to the last battle and gets a little bit thorny, I guess, for Protestants, is that the last battle takes that idea and kind of expands on it a little bit with the character of Emeth, who is the young colorman officer, and he worships Tash, who in Lewis's world isn't a misunderstanding of God, but a genuinely real demonic being, Aslan's opposite, basically. And Emeth has sought Tash sincerely, though, and nobly his whole life, longing to see him. When he passes through the stable door into Aslan's country, Aslan welcomes him, and Aslan's reasoning is kind of the controversial part, that he credits the genuine service of Emeth rendered to Tash as service rendered to himself, because the logic is that nothing truly good can be done in Tash's name, and nothing truly evil can be done in Aslan's name, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go through like that whole thing. I'm sure we'll talk about that more.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's almost like Lewis is saying that the true God claims the sincere seeker regardless of what he was seeking. And do you think that's what Lewis was trying to say?
It's definitely not what Lewis was trying to say. I don't even have to say that I would think that he's not saying that, because he makes it very clear in his Christian nonfiction works that he was not a universalist. He did not believe in a second chance after death. He did have a broader view than a lot of Protestants and even Catholics would have on who would be accepted. He actually believed that general revelation in and of itself could be salvific. So most Protestants believe that there has to be like a special revelation of Scripture. He believed that you could look up at creation and understand that there was a God and trust in that God without knowing the name of Christ or the redemptive cross work of Christ and be saved. And so most Protestants would say, oh, it's not damnable, like he's not cut off, but at the same time, that's very wrong. Like, you have to, but I appreciate the sincerity of what he was trying to do, because he was filtering this through his own mind and through his own eyes of like, because he became a theist about 3 years before he became a Christian. Like he came to a realization that there was a God 2.5, 3 years before he became a Christian, before he went on that late night walk with Tolkien and I forget who the other friend was. And so I do think that there's something to be said for an inclusivity on his part that might not exist for most Protestants or make them uncomfortable. I do want to definitely talk about Emeth as well as Susan.
Yeah.
When we get to the last battle. But for now, I love first of all, we talked about it with the horse and his boy, but I love the hiddenness of Aslan throughout the story. Mm-hmm. He whispers to another, like one of the most famous lines, he whispers in the Sea of Darkness when all hell is breaking loose and people are fearing for their lives. He whispers to Lucy, courage to your heart. It's like one of the, you find it everywhere in artwork, but there's a lot of hiddenness of Aslan and kind of hearing his voice without seeing him throughout the book until the end. But what you see is with Edmund, I keep saying Susan, but with Edmund, with Lucy, and with Eustace, there is very stern and firm correction throughout the book. But for Caspian and for Edmund, it's at the pool where they claim this land for Narnia, or no, I'm really the High King of Narnia. There's all this selfishness and greed that starts power struggle. It starts going on. Edmund has like a little power struggle. And there's correction on the part of Aslan, but I love that it's like, it is firm, but it's also like super compassionate, which gets back to that first episode we talked about, that Lewis paints Aslan so well, because he's never weak. He never excuses things that shouldn't be, but at the same time, he's like incredibly, remarkably compassionate. Same with what are they called? The Duffel Puffs?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Duffel Puff Island, where Lucy sees how beautiful she could be, and she's filled with all this envy and vanity, and Aslan has to correct her. It's one of the only times in the books that Lucy gets corrected, but he does so with firmness and with compassion, and then of course with the same with Eustace. And so I love that throughout the book. But then at the very end, they stumble upon the beach as they're approaching Aslan's land, and it's a lamb. And you have this like really vivid biblical juxtaposition between the lamb and the lion. And you have this lamb up on the beach that transforms into a lion, and it's the lion, it's Aslan. And that's when he says, and Wilson pointed this out when I was watching his lectures on this, but this is in no way, it makes sense, this is in no way teaching like a pluralistic view of God, that he has a bunch of different names in our world, but rather what Lewis is saying is, suppose, that's why it's suppositional, suppose there were other worlds. How would God portray himself? How might he portray himself in those worlds? And in that world, Christ portrays himself as a lion. And in this world, he is metaphorically a lion and literally incarnate. And so when he says the whole point, and I think this can't be missed, because some people, look, I'm just going to be real for a second. Some people were not real happy that we talked through the Chronicles of Narnia as if we were like abandoning the Bible or something. And that's fine. Like, to each their own, I guess. Like, we all each got to like live according to our convictions. But when Aslan says to the children, this is the whole reason that you were brought into Narnia, we have to hear that ourselves. This is the whole reason that we were brought into Narnia. that we could enter into Narnia and see things and understand things and feel things that we wouldn't have felt and seen and understood otherwise. It's the whole reason that we're brought into any realm of fiction, ultimately, is so that by seeing truth here in that fiction, we can see truth more clearly in our dimension and our reality. And so he's saying it to the children there. Hey, this is the whole reason that you came by the wardrobe and the lamppost in the first place, or for Eustace by the sea pitcher and the seascape. But we also hear ourselves in that, so that by understanding or knowing him there a little bit, we can understand him in this dimension, in this time and place, more clearly as Christ himself. So I think that's one of the most powerful moments, not just of Voyage of the Dawn Treader, but of all the series. And there's a reason why a lot of these are very quotable. They're quotes that people know, but it's not enough for, like I said, for us just to be like, oh, he's talking to the children. He's talking to all of us. C.S. Lewis is talking about himself. The whole reason why God gave C.S. Lewis this incredibly imaginative mind is so that by understanding, it's through imagination, it's through literary genius, it's through storytelling that Lewis, in part, became a reluctant convert, because he could understand these mega themes that Scripture talks about and understand the person of Christ and the work of rescue and redemption and reconciliation through story form that is all pointing back to ultimate reality as found in Scripture and in our dimension here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's super fascinating. I love the book. I thought it was there, and there's a lot more that could be talked about. Like I said earlier, how every island is a different dimension of temptation, of struggle.
I found this one very suspenseful too.
Yeah, for sure.
Is there any part in particular, maybe we've already discussed it, but is there any part of this one that stands out to you as a particular favorite?
I mean, I think we have discussed them. I mean, when they arrive upon the beach with Aslan, that'd be number one. Number two would be the de-shedding of Eustace. But I do just think the overall narrative of, I don't know if you ever heard this or not, but Lewis, many scholars believe that Lewis correlated each of the Narnian books with a different planet.
I haven't heard that.
And so it's very interesting. There's a whole book written on it, like a 1,000-page book on the planets in relation to Narnia. And so the planet that he was referencing here is the sun itself. They would have seen that as a planet in the 40s and 50s, or at least roughly so. And so, but the whole idea of, which is very interesting, that the sun is forever in the east, and you're sailing east, even though they understood geographically that the sun would set in the west. But the whole idea that as they progress, things become stranger and they become vaguer in a sense, but they become more beautiful the whole time too. This whole journey and voyage, especially on the part of Reepicheep, who's this longing for substance and ultimate reality. And I think it's interesting that it's Reepicheep who's the first one out of the city gates when they arrive in the new Narnia, in the last battle. That he's kind of like Elijah, in Scripture, or Enoch, who doesn't really die. He sails into Aslan's country. And so that's kind of an interesting theme of, at least theoretically, that as we pursue further up, further in terminology, which really emerges in the last battle, but as we pursue the presence of God himself and what really matters in this life, that things do, at least in some sense, grow. They can become harder in one sense, but in another sense, they become more beautiful and more meaningful, more purposeful. And I think that's another just kind of general theme that could be missed for all the other great themes in this book.
Yeah, man. Well, it's a good one. I am looking forward to discussing The Silver Chair with you. I love that one.
My new favorite now. And Last Battle's right there with it. Last Battle's awesome. So
yeah, and I've told you offline that those old movies that were, I don't know when they were made. I think they were made in the 80s. I remember seeing them as a kid, those made-for-TV movies.
The Wonder Works.
The Silver Chair. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Silver Chair, I always loved that one. That was my favorite of those movies, obviously because of Puddleglum, and there's so much adventure in The Silver Chair. It felt a lot kind of more Lord of Rings-esque than some of the others. And anyway, I'm going to enjoy talking about that one.
For sure.
But yeah, I think that's
that wraps down our voyage for this evening then, I guess.
Yes, it does.